on today talking about the idea of first fruits, moving forward, because I want you to understand what Noah did and how it looks and how it feels. So make sure you turn. Genesis chapter 8, verse 15 through 22. Genesis 8:15, it says this: Then the Lord spoke to Noah, saying, Go out of the ark, you and your wife, and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and cattle, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth, and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife, and his sons' wives with him. Every animal, every creeping thing, every bird, and whatever creeps on the earth, according to their families, went out of the ark. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took of every clean animal and every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings at the altar. And the Lord smelled the soothing aroma. Then he said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. Although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, all day and all night shall not cease. We're going to talk a little bit about the idea of first fruits, but I want to bring you into that world a little bit by telling you a story of me and my kids on, I think it was our last family vacation that we took probably 2 years ago. I'm going to tell you this funny story. If you can move the slide. Everybody wants to be able to see beautiful pictures like this. Go ahead and switch right here. These beautiful pictures. Everybody loves it. You know, these beautiful pictures of it looks like an aquarium. That's why a lot of people love it. But you only get a chance to see these kind of creatures and this kind of view in real life if you go on either scuba diving or snorkeling trips. That's the only way you get a chance to see, you know, these beautiful tropical fish, you know, of multicolors and different sizes, and next to a coral reef. And it's a beautiful thing to see. Number one, in the picture, it's beautiful, but it's even lovelier. It's even better when you see it in real life. And so the last family vacation we went on, my kids and I, we were in Cozumel, and we decided that we were going to go snorkeling. Now, it was a great idea because we're going to get a chance to see, you know, this beautiful sight and see things you only get a chance to see. So we were excited about it. We got donned on our gear, our goggles and our fins, and got all of our pieces together to make sure that our breathing apparatus, to make sure we could, you know, when we came to the top, we could breathe. So it was just an exciting thing, and we were excited about it. But the problem is we were excited about it, but we had a certain idea about what was going to happen, and it didn't turn out to be true. Because when we thought about snorkeling, when I'd gone snorkeling in the past, literally the boat drives you somewhere, and then they set the anchor of the boat. You jump off the boat, and you kind of swim around the boat. And you look at all the little pretty little fish, and then you just and then sometimes it's even shallow enough at certain points where you can swim to a certain spot, and maybe you can stand on a sand dune or what have you. So I had this idea that when I took my kids, it was going to be a really nice little thing, and we're going to jump on a boat, and we're going to go out to this nice little spot, and it was going to be a nice little calm spot, but it didn't happen this way. So this particular snorkeling expedition, once we donned all of our equipment, we walked, down the beach, around this long bend to this pier. And you came to the edge of this pier, and the instructor told you that you got to jump in from here, and the water right there is about 25 feet deep. So we're like, no problem. We'll jump in and come to the pier. And I was thinking that I guess we're going to just swim around the pier. That's what we're going to do. We're just going to hang out around the pier, and we'll get a chance to see. So me being dad, I'm like, I'll jump in first. So I jumped in first. So I'm in the water, and then my kids jump in, and all the instructors jump in, and we're all there, and all the other tourists. And you're swimming around the pier, and you're looking around, and you're saying, oh, man, this is nice. And so you actually saw things like this, saw these beautiful multicolored fish. And so we're swimming around the pier, and it's great. And then the instructor bids us all to come up to the top, and so we're there, and he says, now we're going to swim around the reef. And I said, oh, and he said, now you can't, he said, the reef is beautiful, but you cannot touch the reef because it looks attractive, but it is called a stinging reef, which means that if you touch it, it's going to start stinging and burning your skin. And he said, so even though you may be tempted to touch it, don't touch it because it's going to sting and burn your skin. He says, so now what we're going to do is we're going to swim. We're at the pier. So I want you to understand, we had walked down the beach around this long bend, and now we're at this pier. And what he tells us is in order to get out of the water, you can't just go back up and climb up on the pier. You're going to have to swim through away from the pier, and then you got to swim around the reef. Now, I want you to understand, the reef, it wasn't this little juncture of wood that would stick out 10 or 20 feet. You know, this was a part of the land, which means literally, you know, you're talking about swimming around something like our church building. You know, and then once you swim around our church building, and so if you can imagine this hunk of land that's about 10,000 square feet that was jutted out into the sea. So now you got to swim around 10,000 square feet. And then once you swim around 10,000 square feet, he says, then you'll see the beach on your far left. He says, and then we'll swim toward and to the beach. And then we'll just get out of the beach. And I was thinking, like, wait a minute. Now, we're all the way over here by the pier. Now, you know, this is fun because you can swim in little circles, and then when you get tired, you can hold on to the pier and look and laugh and hee ha ha. But once we get out there, swim or die. You got to make it. And so and I'm like, it must not be that bad. Now, you remember, though, that swimming is is a major exercise because it uses so many different muscle groups. And you have to be in shape to swim for a long distance. Now, once again, swimming around a little pier and holding on to the side, that's hee ha ha stuff. And so I didn't realize how much I missed the land until we started swimming. And as we started swimming, it went from 25 feet to about 60, 65, 75 feet. So when you look down, you saw this beautiful picture. But the problem is, there was nothing to hold on to when you got tired. There was nowhere to put your feet when you got tired, so you had to keep swimming. But I began to get tired because we hadn't done that kind of swimming. And you're not talking about a swimming pool, you're talking about out in the Gulf of Mexico, so there's currents and waves and stuff. So I'm swimming, and I'm trying to and the reef seems like it's getting longer and longer. And so after a certain point, I began to get tired. And just out of habit, I was like, I got to go put my hand on something just to be able to catch my breath. So I started swimming toward the reef because I'm like, I need to just be able to catch my breath for a minute. And the instructor, he swims up to me real fast and says, no, you can't touch the reef. You say, we have to keep swimming. It'll sting you. So now I didn't realize how much I appreciated land. I didn't realize how much I loved the fact and I valued the fact that I could put my foot down on something when I got tired. Because here I am in 60 to 75 feet of water, beautiful, crystal clear water, beautiful reef on one side of me, the ocean on the other side of me, beautiful fish below me. The problem is I'm tired. And so I keep swimming. And then I start thinking to myself, wait a minute, my kids are out here and they're following me. So I either have to think about something. Am I going to be the dad that drowns on the snorkeling trip? And so I was like, I can't be the dad that drowns. That's going to be a bad memory for them. And then if you can imagine them going back on the beach and Felicia saying, where's daddy? And they said, well, he couldn't make it. He just gave up. But I want you to understand, I was so tired. But I was like, I have to do one or two things. I have to swim or drown. I don't have any other recourse. There's no ropes. There's no boat. I'm just literally around the reef in 50, 60 feet of water. I'm sitting there. My kids are following me. And I'm thinking, I just got to go for it. And so I literally I put my head down and I just began to swim as hard and as fast as I can. I was so tired. And I was thinking, all I want is land. If I just want to be able to put my feet down on something. And I can remember turning the corner of that reef, I'm swimming, and my heart is beating fast, and my legs are starting to cramp, but I'm thinking, I don't want to drown. And I'm thinking, I miss land so much. See, you don't value something until you miss it. You don't really understand the value of something until you don't have access to it. And I didn't have access to land. And so my whole thought and all of my energy became to be focused about getting to land. And Richard, I swam around the reef and breathed hard. And then I saw the beach. And I began to swim toward the beach. And I was in front of the instructor. Not because I was a good swimmer, not because I had perfect form. I was trying to survive. I was just trying to make it because I was breathing hard. I was tired. The water wasn't helping me. And then what the worst was when I was coming toward the beach and I could see that the ground was close, but it wasn't close enough for me to put my feet down. So I had to keep swimming until the ground was enough for me to put my feet down. I was swimming so hard and I was breathing so hard. And finally I can remember the joy. Listen, I smile about it right now because I can remember the moment when my fin, I felt the dirt, I felt the sand. And I can remember when I felt it on my feet. And I can remember when I had to tiptoe to walk in. And then finally when I began to walk, and the waves were hitting me, and I came out of the water, and I was sitting there, and Felicia said, "Did you enjoy your snorkeling trip?" And I was like, hell no. I said, I almost drowned out there because I found myself out there without something that I valued, which was land. And I found myself stressing. And I found myself trying, but I knew that I either had to make it, or I had to swim to make it, or I had to drown. I'm saying to you that pretty pictures are great, but you know what you don't think about? That the land or the ground is way down there. And the problem is there's no air down there. So Noah being a man of God, when we look at our text, Noah being a man of God who loved God, didn't understand how much he valued certain things. If you think about it, even when he was preaching, it's going to rain, and he was building the ark, there was probably something in him that was like, you need to listen to me, and pointing his fingers and looking at people who were making fun of him, looking at families who were meddling him and meddling his kids, and he was like, God's going to get you. And that was cool until probably about month 3. Then he began to miss those people. He began to miss the laughter and miss the people, and he began to miss land and miss the idea of being able to be free. Can you imagine being confined? Remember, we said it last week. He was confined for almost over a year and 10 days. When we look at the biblical count, literally. So for a year and 10 days, he's on this boat, floating, feeling confined. Can you imagine how much he just missed just the opportunity to walk on land? I mean, listen, I struggled with a coral reef just swimming around it. But can you imagine not being on land for over a year? And he missed it so much. I can imagine he was like, man, I can't wait to get up off this boat. Have you ever been on a cruise? And most of us like cruises, and you love cruises. It depends upon your personality. But there reaches a point in the cruise where you say, okay, all right, enough is enough. I'm ready. I'm ready to get off. I'm having a great time. I'm relaxed. We're going to the pool. I'm getting my massages. I'm hanging out. I'm sleeping. I'm eating. But now, you know what? I can only go to see the show so many times. I can only play so many rounds of bingo. I can only get so many massages. And I'm ready now to get off. That's why they do ports, because they know that at some point you get ready to get off. Think about it. Noah couldn't get off a year and 10 days. That's got to be tough. And so my thought is, if I was stuck on a boat for a year and 10 days, what's the very first thing that I would do when I got off? Because I remember the very first thing that I did when I got out of the water, I went and found me a chair. And I sat in that chair, and I laid back, and I fell asleep. I was so happy to be confined and comforted by that security and everything else. I liked the fact that I felt weight. I didn't want to float no more. I just wanted to sit back. And I can imagine Noah, after a year and 10 months, was like, God, let me off. Let me out. And I imagine some of you guys have been, let me out. I just need to get out. I just want to just get out of the house. There were accidents everywhere, and most of them were with those muscle cars. Why? Because somebody was driving because they needed to just get out this morning. they didn't want to be confined, so they got out, and they ended up getting in trouble. They ended up having an accident. I want to understand that sometimes when you're confined for a long time, you just want to get out. And Noah just wanted to get out. He wanted to get out. So now the question is this. Go to my next slide. The question is this. Now, when Noah gets out, the first thing, he doesn't do like what we do. One of the things that we do, what I would do is I'd probably sit down for a while. I'd probably build a shelter. I'd probably just love the land. Just be happy to get my legs off under me. I'd be happy to get off the ship. I would go sit down in some grass that I ain't sat in for a long time. What does Noah do? Noah stops. He builds an altar immediately, and he gives a sacrifice. So the question that I have, was this offering or this gift, was this a first fruits offering? Because when we talk about first fruits, it's an offering. It's the first crop that the soil yielded each growing season. So each season, when we talk about a first fruits offering, it's the first crop. It's the first thing. Now, you can imagine, once again, Noah's been on the ship for this long. So you say, Dr. Moody, he didn't have, there was no crop. So clearly that couldn't have been the first fruit. Well, it didn't say he gave an offering of every piece of wheat or everything else. So we know that it wasn't an agricultural thing, but the first fruit also dealt with livestock. And remember, they've been on the boat for a year and 10 days, which means the animals have had a chance to go into their reproductive cycle. The females have had a chance to go into heat, and they've had a chance to literally, the males have had a chance to impregnate them because they've been in a confined space and everything else. And so you can imagine that on this ark, there may have been some birth of the animals or some birth, some new offspring that came. And so when you give the first fruits offering, you acknowledge that everything you receive comes from the Lord. And listen, and he was the creator, master, and owner. So when you think about the first fruits offering, it is a way where you say, God, you own everything. You are on everything, and that you are the source. It is an acknowledgement that God is the source of everything. He creates everything, and he is a provider. I remember I said this earlier. Your job is a resource. God is the source. So always remember that. My job, my employer is a resource. God is the source. So you can transition jobs or you can transition resources, but you never want to be disconnected from the source. So God is the source. So a first fruit offering acknowledges, it is your way of acknowledging, God, you are the source. You are the owner. And then the first fruit would also guarantee future productivity, because whatever I did with the first would tell me what would happen to the last. So if the first was blessed, the last was blessed. These are the principles behind the first fruits. So when we talk about a first fruits offering, we talk about at the beginning of every year that you yield up this offering of your first harvest, your first level of income, your first ingrowth, your first reception of income. And that first fruit, what you do is you sow that into God. Well, Dr. Moody, is that why? Did it include everything? Yes. Look, it included agriculture and livestock. Exodus 13:2. I'm going to teach you today, so I want you to write these down, because when we talk about first fruits, I'd like you to be informed. I'd like you to be able to write it down and study it yourself, and you'll see, man, it's there. It makes sense. So the first fruits was not just agriculture, but it was also livestock. Exodus 13:2. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying this: consecrate or set aside to me all the firstborn. Who are the firstborn? The first fruit. That's the first thing that comes. It says, whatever opens the womb. What's the first thing that comes out the womb? He said, among the children of Israel, both man and beast is mine. So literally, when we talk about first fruits, we talk about giving back to God the first thing that comes out. I'll say it again. The first thing that comes out. Some of y'all said, man, if I had known that, I would give my child away to God a long time ago. But you kept him now, so you can't give him back now. It's Exodus 13:2 says it is both agriculture and livestock. And then what happens when I give my first fruits? What happens when I bring my first fruits to God? It says the increase was always connected to first fruits, Proverbs 3:9. Honor the Lord with your possessions. So somebody says, I do that. I bring my tithe. I do that, Dr. Moody. I bring an offering. That's what I do. It says this. It doesn't say or. It doesn't say if your possessions, or it doesn't just say your possessions, which are the first fruits. It says with your possessions and capitalize with the first fruits of your increase, which means that the first fruits is not the tithe. The first fruit is not just your general offering. It says with your possessions. That means things you already have, but now the first thing that comes out, you give God back that. Honor him. That word, the honor, literally means to make him heavy, to make him important. So that when I bring my first fruits, what I say to God is, you're heavy. You're my priority. You're very important to me. Some of y'all are getting it because as I'm preaching, you're like, man, am I going to sow my first fruit? You're thinking that right now. And the reason why you think that is because the word of God now, you're starting to say, man, this is actually in the Bible. Yep, you've got to understand that first fruits is actually a principle that's in the Bible. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first fruits of all your increase. So I'm going to say this to you. If you have 12 jobs, you got 12 first paychecks. So you don't play games with God with the first fruits and say, well, on this first paycheck, it's only $300. But my other first check on my other job is $3,000. So I'm going to give him this $300 and then I'm going to check the box. It says with the first fruits, get this is the Bible here, of all your increase. That means everywhere you're growing, this is what you do. And why? What happens when I do this? So your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will overflow with new wine. In other words, when I sow the first fruits, I set off a spiritual mechanism that says now everything that's attached to that will be blessed. Everything that attached to that is going to increase. If you would believe God and believe me for this and sow this into me, I can make sure that everything that's attached to you from this point on will be blessed the rest of the year. First fruits was one of the three primary feasts of Israel. Israel had three primary feasts that they would travel each year. Exodus 23:14 says this, 3 times you shall keep a feast to me a year. So the Israelites had three primary feasts that they kept every year. And you shall keep, here's the first one, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Well, they would eat unleavened bread for 7 days at a time. So in that month, they would stop doing whatever it is that they were doing. They would remember that God brought them out of Egypt, and they would eat unleavened bread, and they would consecrate to the Lord. The second one, verse 16, and the Feast of Harvest, which is the first fruits of your labor, which you're sown to the field. The Feast of Ingathering. So that Feast of Harvest was the Feast of First Fruits. This was the second feast. And then the Feast of Ingathering at the end of the year. So 3 times a year they would pilgrim. 3 times a year they would consecrate. They would have a convocation. They would have a gathering. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of First Fruits, and the Feast of Ingathering. 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the Lord, and you shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with unleavened bread, nor shall the fat of my sacrifice remain to the morning. Listen, the first of the first fruits of your land you shall bring where? To the house of the Lord your God. So literally, these 3 times a year, you're going to come in and you're going to have a convocation. You're going to have a conference. You're going to come together. You're going to stop working. But then you should always come bringing something. But in the Feast of First Fruits, you bring in the first of your harvest. It says this, the first of the first fruits of your land. So that means all of your agriculture, you bring where? To the house of the Lord. You don't just set aside, pray over, and then eat it. It says you bring it where? To the house of the Lord. So that means that when you talk about first fruits, yes, should you donate to the Red Cross? Sure. Should you donate to a lot of charities? Great. Should you donate to the homeless and the Pet Society and all these kind of things? Of course you should. But that's not your first fruits. Don't give them your first fruits. Where does your first fruits go? Your first fruit there, to the house of the Lord. When we come to the first fruits, it was not just a suggestion. But when you came to a new land or a new season, what would you do? You would always sow first fruits. Leviticus 23:9. Now get this. And I put some things in red because I want to emphasize them. And the Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the children of Israel. So man of God, Dr. Moody, tell the people of God, everybody who's streaming. Moses, tell Israel. Tell them what? when you come into the land which I give you. That means when you come into a new season, when you come into a blessing, and listen, and reap its harvest. That means when you got that new job, when you moved to that city and got that bonus, everything else, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. The very first thing you do when you come into that new land is you make sure that that first fruit goes to the house. That first fruit goes to the house. It doesn't go to your house. It goes to God's house. Then it says this: he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted on behalf. Literally, when they would bring that sheaf of wheat, they would bring it before the priest, and it was called a wave offering, because they would wave it because it was something that they let everybody know. Everybody understood this represents part of that first fruit. This sheaf or this stack of wheat. And I'm bringing it in, and it says this. Now get this. Now, Richard, look at this. It says this, verse 11. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted on your behalf. When? On the day after the Sabbath. I want you to put a pin right there, because number one, when you come into a new land, put a pin right there, and then put a pin right here. When do I bring it? The day after the Sabbath, right? Put a pin right there, and then you shall offer it on that day. Which day? The day after the Sabbath. When you wave the sheaf, a male lamb of the first year without blemish, as a what? Burnt offering. So when I come into a new land, pin. When do I give it? On the day after the Sabbath, pin. And what is it going to represent? A burnt offering, pin, right? And its grain offering shall be 2/10 of an ephah, fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made with flour for the Lord for a sweet aroma, another pin. Boom. Now, so when we talk about first fruits, we talk about something that's given when you come into a new land. We talk about something that is given on the day after the Sabbath. We talk about a burnt offering, and we talk about this offering being a sweet aroma. These are principles when you look at the first fruit. And it says this, and Dr. Moody, now, God told Moses to do this in Leviticus. That was Old Testament. So isn't the first fruit over? Because Jesus died on the cross, so we don't have to do none of that stuff no more. And this shall be, verse 13, and you shall eat neither bread nor parched grain, nor fresh grain until that same day you brought offering. So he said, don't you eat nothing until you make sure that you prioritize the house of God. Then it says this, and it shall be, listen, a statute where? Forever throughout your generations. So there is no cancellation of this. There is no, that was, because we like to say that, well, that was Old Testament, or that was, we live in the season of grace now, so we don't have to do that. This says very clearly that this shall be a statute. How long? Forever. So when do I stop it? When do I never? So I'm going to always do it. It's a sweet aroma. It's a burnt offering. It's given the day after Sabbath. And when I enter new land, boy, I'm laying some stuff out for you. Let's go a little further. So now we'll talk about this idea of first fruits. Remember, Exodus 22 and 29. You're going to sow it as soon as possible. What do you mean? You shall not delay to offer the first of your ripe produce and your juices. The firstborns of your sons you shall give to me. Likewise, you shall do with your oxen and your sheep. So, with your produce, with your kids, and with your sheep. I know somebody's going to ask me this question today. I can already feel it. How am I supposed to give the first fruit to my child? I know somebody's going to ask that question. That means I got to bring all my children into the church, and the church adopt them. I know that's the question. I know somebody's going to answer that question. I can already sense it. Remember this. First of all, let's deal with your increase. Second of all, let's deal with things that God has blessed you with. And then you're supposed to be dedicating your children to God. That doesn't mean that they have to all work in the temple, but your children should be grown up as disciples. Just like Hannah brought Samuel in, and Samuel learned how to work in ministry. You need to be bringing your children in and teach them how to work in ministry and teach them how to be worshipers. That's the equation of dedicating them. Instead of dedicating them to the science club and to ballet and to the Boy Scouts and everything else, that you make sure that first of all they are worshipers, and that's their primary drive. And then after they are established as worshipers, they can do all these other things. That's how you bring that first child in there. I want to answer that because I know somebody's going to ask me that question. So now, but notice this. It says this: don't delay. How soon should I get it? Don't delay. Can I pay my first fruits over time? Can I pay it from January through July so it doesn't affect me as much? Don't delay. As soon as you get it, right? It says offer what? The first of your ripe produce and your juices. So I'm bringing my agriculture. I'm bringing the juices, which means I'm bringing the stuff that I squeeze out of my agriculture. And then it says, I'm bringing the firstborn of my sons. So now it deals with people. And then now, likewise, deal with oxen and sheep. So all of my livestock, everything I sow first fruits. I'm always sowing first fruit. The first of everything goes back to God. That's the principle. The first of everything, it totally belongs to you. Dr. Moody, isn't this the tithe? Aren't you preaching the tithe? That's that first tenth part. But there's a difference between the first fruit and the tithe. I told you, it said, with your possessions in Proverbs chapter 3. And it says, and the first fruits. Go to my, then God's sensitive about this. In Jeremiah 2, notice, this is, and Jeremiah speaking to those who are literally in exile. And God is talking, and he's talking to them in exile, and he's saying this: Israel was the holiness to the Lord. He said Israel was God's offspring, it was God's son. But get this, the first fruits of his increase. So how important is first fruits? God says Israel was like the first fruits to me. He says that when you want to know how important Israel was, the best way I can explain to you how important Israel was to say it was like the first fruits. So you got to understand how important this was to the believer of the Old Testament. They were like, man, they understood it. First fruits was not an anomaly. It was not something that one or two people did. Literally, when it comes to first fruits, the Israelite family or the Jewish family understood, because the father, the patriarch, before the fruit and before the harvest would come in, would literally, get this, Richard, he would mark out grounds and mark off trees, the best trees and the best areas, and say, this right here is the first fruit. And before the harvest even came in, they would mark it off saying, this is going to be the best. I can tell this goes to God first. And literally, as it came in, the father would then take the first fruits, and they would give the animals as burnt offerings, but they would take the agriculture and place it in baskets and put it at the doors of the tabernacle for the priest. That was the first fruits. That's what it was used for. And nobody in Israel misunderstood that. So when they say, well, how do we know that God loves us, Prophet Jeremiah? How do we know that God cares for us? Prophet Jeremiah says, oh, you want to know how much God loves for you? He says, Israel was like the first fruits to God. Everybody went, oh, I get that. The first fruits? Yes. You want to know how much God loves you and how sensitive God was about you? You were like the first fruits. Now we understand the seriousness of it. He says, the first fruits of his increase. And listen, and all that devour him will offend. Disaster will come upon them. So God said, if you mess with my first fruit, just like you mess with Israel, I'm going to get you. This is how God feels about it. Now, even when the people fell off, when they began to fall back in love with God and they had great spiritual reform, look and see what's the very first thing they put back in place. 2 Chronicles, go there. 2 Chronicles. They had fallen away from God. They began to worship other gods. Is this some good stuff? Because I want you to understand this, because you need to be able to argue this. When they had fallen away from God, because somebody will say, Dr. Moody, I fell away from God, so I don't have to do first fruits because I just need to get my life right. I haven't done all that I need to do, and so let me just work on that this year. Talk to me in 2025 about first fruits. It says this, 2 Chronicles chapter 31, verse 1. It says, and when all this had finished, all Israel who were present went out to the cities of Judea. In other words, what literally they had done, there had been a great religious reform, and they had discovered they had fallen away from God. And when they fell away from God, the king Hezekiah came back and he said, we're going to get these things right. So they destroyed all the altars of all the Baal worshipers. They destroyed all of this stuff and brought the whole country back under God's. So listen. They broke the sacred pillars in pieces. They cut down the wooden images. They did all this stuff. They threw down the high places. So now, literally, they destroyed them all. In other words, they went back and they said, we got to get our life right. That's what you're saying. You got to get our life right. Then the children of Israel returned to their own cities, every man to his possession. So after they got their lives right, they said, we got to get this straight. They tore down all the altars. Everybody went back home. Hezekiah appointed. Hezekiah said, now we're going to put a structure in place. We're going to appoint division of the priests and Levites according to the division. So literally, he said, we're going to put a structure back in place. We're going to put priests where they need to be. and priests at the gate and everything else. Verse 3, and the king also appointed a portion of his possessions to the burnt offering. So the king said, now I'm going to sow a seed for the morning and the evening, the burnt offerings of the Sabbath and the new moons and the set feasts, as it is written by the law. So he said, I'm setting aside money so that I could sow every offering we have and even the feast. But get this, verse 4. Moreover, he commanded the people who dwelt in Jerusalem to contribute support for the priests and the Levites, that they may devote themselves to the law of the Lord. So he says, since we're getting reform right, I've got everybody back in place. The first thing we got to do is we got to make sure that the priests and Levites have the means to set up the religious structure. We got all the things set up. We want to make sure they do this. How do we do that? Verse 5. As soon as the commandment was circulated, listen, the children of Israel, the people who had fallen away from God, the children of Israel, the people who had left the things of God, brought in abundance what? The first fruits of the grain and the wine and the honey and all the produce of the field. They brought it in abundantly. Listen, they brought in abundantly the tithe of everything. So literally the first thing they do, what's the very first thing they do once they get their life right? They bring in what? The first fruit. And then they say, now we can begin tithing. And it says, and then it says this, and the children, verse 6, and the children of Israel and Judah, who dwelt in the cities of Judah, brought the tithe, the oxen and the sheep, also the tithe of the holy things, which were consecrated to the Lord. So when people got their lives right and they got right, the very first thing the king said was bring the first fruits and then start tithing. Bring the first fruits and then start tithing. Dr. Moody, what if I tithe? Bring the first fruits and then start tithing. Dr. Moody, what if I want to just tithe and is God going to be all right with that? Bring the first fruits and then begin to tithe. Go ahead. Next slide. So now, Dr. Moody, I get it, but I still argue that the Old Testament, I'm a dispensationalist, and I believe that we're in the dispensation of grace, and the Old Testament was the dispensation of the law, and we're no longer under the law. So first fruits is null and void. Aha! I want to teach you for a minute. Let's look at this. So that means that if it was null and void, Paul would not use it to talk about anything in the New Testament. If it was null and void, they would not use a null and void concept in the New Testament to defend or talk about something. But notice here, in Romans chapter 16, verse 3 through 5, Paul is writing to the church of Rome, and he says this, greet Priscilla and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus. So now he says, I got the people that work with me in ministry, who risk their own necks for my life, to whom I will not only give thanks, but also to the churches of Gentiles. So these two people risk their own life for ministry. But then verse 3 says this, likewise, greet the church that is in their house. They started a church in their house. Greet my beloved Epaphroditus, who is, get this, the first fruits of Acacia to Christ. Paul uses the concept of the first fruits because he knew that everybody understood that concept. That first fruit represented that first soul that was saved in that region. So Epaphroditus was the first soul that was saved in this region. And Paul used the first fruits concept because he knew that that concept was not nullified in the New Testament. In the Roman church, he says, this man's the first fruits of this region. Then, not only that, in 1 Corinthians 16 and 15, it says this, I urge you, brethren, you know that the household of Cephas, that is the first converts of Acacia, that they devoted themselves to the ministry of the saints, that you would submit such to everyone who works with and labors among us. He says, listen, I'm talking to you about this household, and this household was the first fruits. Why? They were the first converts. And then also in James chapter 1, verse 18, it says this, James says, so it wasn't just Paul, but James uses it. He says, of his own will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we, talking about you and me, or those who are in the church, might be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. So if the first fruits was null and void, if the first fruits was under the law and no longer, it should be nullified, why are they using in the New Testament to talk about the first people who got saved and the first people who came to Christ? Because it's still a key principle. Now, if you don't like that, and if you don't agree with that, then I want to challenge you a bit further. 1 Corinthians 15 and 20. Listen, the reason why you enjoy watching what it is that we do here at the Rock is because you say, man, even if I want to argue it, he's arguing the point, and it's making sense to me. Notice we talk about first fruits in the Old Testament. We talk about first fruits when they had religious reform, and now we talk about first fruits in the New Testament. And Paul talked about it, James talked about it, but get this. Paul uses the first fruits, and he uses Christ as an example of the first fruit. Woo, that's some good stuff. Verse 20. But now Christ is risen from the dead. So, why? Because in 1 Corinthians 15, they were arguing with the Sadducees. The Sadducees were arguing that there is no bodily resurrection. They were saying, no, when you die, you just go into, your body just goes into annihilation or goes back in the grave because the soul is the most important thing. That's what the Sadducees were saying. So there is no resurrection. They kept arguing this over and over again. So Paul is arguing with them in 1 Corinthians about the resurrection. And he says this, but now Christ is risen. So Christ has been resurrected, right? From the dead. And listen, and has become, get this, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. So he says, hey, you want to argue resurrection? Christ is resurrected. And he is the first fruits. So why would Paul use Christ as an example of a null and void principle? See, you can think about it. Why, if it was null and void, and it was no longer to be carried out, and it no longer mattered, why would Paul use Christ and use this principle to exemplify a point? See, you got to ask yourself that question. That means that it made sense to Paul as a Pharisee. It made sense to Paul as a kingdom man. And Christ, he says Christ because he's risen. You want to argue resurrection, Christ rose, and he is a kind of first fruits. But he says this. For since by man came death, i.e. Adam, and by man also came the resurrection. So what happened to Adam? Because he was the first man. So when sin entered Adam, some good stuff. Sin entered all men because Adam was a type of first fruits. And so we had to do a do-over. So when Christ came and Christ was a resurrection, because he became the resurrection, he is the first fruits. That means that whatever happens to Christ happens to me. Why? It's the principle of the first fruits. You cannot argue Christ and resurrection without acknowledging the principle of the first fruit. I am teaching my behind off. It says this, for as in Adam all die, so in Christ all shall be made alive. What is that, Richard? That's the principle of the first fruit. He's saying whatever happened to him will establish or set up what happens to everybody else. He says, but each one, listen to this, in his own order, Christ, the first fruits, afterwards those who are Christ at his coming. In other words, because Christ was resurrected, then what can we believe? We can believe that we're going to be resurrected. So you're saying you do believe in the principle of first fruits, because you say whatever happened to Christ is going to happen to me. That's the principle of the first fruits. So you can't have it your way and not have it when it costs you. You can't have it your way and not have it when you got to give. You got to decide, is it a principle or is it not? And if it's not a principle, why is Paul arguing it? If it's not a principle, why do I look forward to the resurrection? If it's not a principle, why are we using it in the New Testament? If it's not a principle, why would they say, I'm going to use, this is the statute forever? I am teaching y'all some good stuff today. Listen, it may be cold outside, but it's hot in the rock. I'm trying to tell you, it's some good stuff that's happening. Now, go to my next slide. Now, let's look at Noah. And because Noah was before the first fruits. And people will argue, if you want to argue that the first fruit was a law issue, I've already shown you that it existed after the law. I've shown you that it existed after the law. But Dr. Moody, did first fruit just appear in Leviticus before the law? I want to argue with you for just a few minutes more that the first fruit was an issue before the law. It was not just a thing after the law. It was a thing. I've taught that the tithe came before the law. But I want to argue now that the principle of first fruit appears before the law. Dr. Moody, prove it to me. I will. So now it says this. And so now we know this. Noah, he's in the ark. He sent out a raven. The raven doesn't come. The raven, he wants the raven to find out. The raven never comes back. The dove finds no resting place. So it returned, but finally it comes back in verse 9. The dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot. Like me, when I was swimming in that place, the dove found no resting place. So she returned to the ark, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Then he put out his hand and took her and drew her into the ark to himself. And he waited yet another 7 days and sent the dove out again. Verse 11, then the dove came to him in the evening, and behold, a freshly picked olive leaf was in her mouth. And Noah knew the waters had receded from the earth. So now Noah knows that there's dry land. Get this. Verse 12, and he waited yet another 7 days and sent out the dove, which did not return anymore. So he waited 7 days. Why is this important? Because when was the first fruit to be given? The day after the Sabbath. So Noah waits 7 days before he leaves the ark. And then God tells him after 7 days, God tells him after 7 days, Reggie, now you can leave. So he leaves the ark after the Sabbath. And on the day after the Sabbath, what's the very first thing that he does? He gives a burnt offering, or he gives an offering of the first fruit. When was the first fruit supposed to be given? Go to my next slide. I'm going to show you. When was the first fruit sown? Number one, it's sown as soon as you enter into a new season. You want to know, when do I sow the first fruit? As soon as I enter into a new season. What's the principle there? Did Noah do that, Dr. Moody? Yes, Genesis 8:21. Noah comes off the ark. Everything is dead. Everything is gone. This is a new season. What's the first thing Noah does? He builds an altar. And then he took of every clean animal and clean bird offerings. So he sold it as soon as he entered into the new season. What does he do? He sows his first fruit. He doesn't stop. He doesn't go build a house. He doesn't set up things for himself. As soon as he enters into a new season, what do we do with the first fruit? As soon as we enter a new season, what do? We sow it. At the beginning of every year, what do I do? Oh, why? It's a new season. We see this principle being set up before the law. Now, it says this, and then he sowed it the day after the Sabbath. Because why? In Leviticus 23 and 11, it says we sow it the day after Sabbath. Noah waits how many days? 7 days. What's the seventh day? The seventh day is the Sabbath. And then after the seventh day, God tells him to leave the ark. He leaves the ark the day after the Sabbath. And what does he do? He now gives a burnt offering or a first fruit offering of every clean animal. Not just, see, you got to get this in your mind. Get it out of your head that he just gave a dove. Get it out of your head that he just gave, listen, of the firstborn of every animal he brings and he gives on the day after the Sabbath as soon as he walks into his land. I am teaching my behind off, and you should be clapping your hand because you're saying, doggone it, it is the first fruit is before the law. It's after the law and it's before the law. Then it says this, when I give a first fruit, what does it do? It sends a signal to God. The Lord smelled what? A soothing aroma. You guys remember in Leviticus, what did I say? I told you to put a pin in it. A soothing aroma. So we see all the principles of first fruit. We see Noah walking it out before the law. And God smells a soothing aroma, which means he sent the signal saying this, God, I trust you completely. God, I know that you are the owner of everything. I know you are the creator of everything. I know that you are the keeper of everything. And so when I sow this first fruit, and I give it as a burnt offering, when you smell that aroma, that's a sign that I'm saying, God, you know what? I believe in you still. Listen, I might have had a rough year, but I believe in you still. I might have a rough season, but I believe in you still. It might not have gone the way I wanted it to go, but listen, I believe in you still. And the first thing I want to do when I get into a new year is I want to show God, I still believe in you. I don't care who COVID took out of my family. I still believe in you. I don't care what I'm dealing with as far as disease or stress. I still believe in you, God. Why? Because it is not the government that's my provider. It is not my job that's my provider. You are my provider, and I believe in you. So I'm going to send up, I'm going to sow a seed, a first fruit, and that first fruit is going to let you know, God, I still believe in you. Then it says this, then the first fruit sets up the standard for the next season. So God smelled the aroma, and then it says, and the Lord said in his heart, he says, man, after all you've been through, we still love me like that. And God says, yes, I love me like that. He says, you never again destroy the earth like that. Even though I know you ain't together. That's why he says, I know the imaginations of your heart still jacked up. He says, but because you sent a signal to me, Listen, I'm going to let you know, here's how the new season is going to go. He says, while the earth remains, seed time, harvest, cold, heat, winter, and summer, all day and all night shall not cease. So he says, so we send, when we saw first fruit, we let God know I believe in you. And then God sends a signal back saying, okay, you believe in me? He says, let me tell you how this season's going to work. Sow seed, I'm going to keep blessing you. You can count on a blessing coming from this seed. You can count on me meeting your need. You can count on it because this is how it works. As long as the earth remains, seed time and harvest. Because Noah, you're first. And you're the first off the boat. You're the first. You're the patriarch. You're the leader. And what do? You give the first fruits, and that you set the principle. You set up the paradigm. I haven't even talked about the first fruits because we ain't even in Leviticus. I haven't even talked about the first fruit as a law issue because I haven't even dealt with Exodus yet. But you set the paradigm because of your heart, and now that principle there is set up forever. So when I talk about it in Exodus, when I talk about it in Leviticus, it's not because of the legalities of it. It's because we have a covenant. And the principle of the covenant, God says, I'm going to explain to y'all how to keep the covenant that Noah established before the law. I hope that this helps you. I hope that this blessed you. I hope that it enlightened you. Because I'm going to challenge you this morning to bring your first fruit. Why? Because new season, it's a new day. God, I want to send a signal to God. I want to make sure that I do it first. I prioritize it. And I want to make sure that I sow it because understand this. Not only is it a law issue in Exodus and Leviticus, it's a heart issue in Genesis. Not only is it a heart issue in Genesis, it's a recovery, repentance issue in 2 Chronicles. Not only is it a 2 Chronicles repentance issue, it's also a principle in the New Testament. First fruit. So I'm going to challenge you to bring your first fruit. I'm going to challenge you to.
Thank you for worshiping with us today. If you like this message, you can find the rest at cmllcstore.com. We invite you to join us again for our extraordinary worship services every Sunday at 10:30 a.m., Sundays at 4 p.m., and Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. Central, where Dr. Moody teaches how to understand the Bible, and you can get all your biblical questions answered. We look forward to connecting with you. We ask that you subscribe to The Rock ATX on YouTube and follow The Rock ATX on Facebook and Instagram to stay connected to all The Rock is doing. You can also get connected on our website at therockatx.org. Again, thank you for worshiping with us and be blessed.